We're a very commercial group. We've got our eye on the charts in the United States of America and Britain and all over the world. I mean, our direct competition is a culture club in Duran Duran. We're competing with those groups. We're not competing with anybody in the independent charts at all. That's pointless.
Why are people so excited about you?
Because we're so good. Because we're so much better than everybody else. Because so many other people are complete rubbish that people have got to pay attention to us. It's pretty obvious, really. Seems like.
We want to educate people.
Ian here. Today I want to talk about the two sides of one of my favorite bands of all time, the Jesus and the Mary Chain. So the Jesus and the Mary Chain are a Scottish post-punk pop, noisy, shoegazy, rock and roll mix of everything. So in 1985 they released their debut single, which is Upside Down, which has a Syd Barrett B-side, Vegetable Man. And this kind of is just so different from everything going on in the 80s at the time. Like, you had the electronic craze, you had bands like Water, like Pet Shop Boys, and then you have Jesus and the Mary Chain, which is just a completely different animal. So at the beginning of their career, they famously said they want to make Shangri-La's records, which I'll get into later on in the video. But I really just want to talk about what influences went into creating this noise-ridden Phil Spector punk pop. And let's get into it. So in 1985, Blanco y Negro Records puts out their debut album, Psycho Candy. Now, tons have called it bubblegum pop, drenched in feedback. I find it to be the perfect marriage of noise and pop. You have these classic 60s pop melodies, and then you have these blistering fed-back guitars. So, to me, it's really like the Shangri-La's backed by like the Velvet Underground or the Stooges. So I kind of just want to talk about the two sides of Psycho Candy. The Psycho and the Candy. So the Psycho aspect of the Jesus and Mary Chain is kind of obvious. It's the noise, it's probably the first thing that most people will notice when they listen to them for the first time. And a lot of that comes from some influences that I think are pretty obvious, but some may not see them, but I think they're pretty clear. So you have like bands like the Stooges and Suicide, two punk bands of the 70s. Then there's also like Chicago Blues, like Muddy Waters and Bo Diddley. And then, which I think is the most important influence, which also goes in the Candy aspect, is the Velvet Underground. The Stooges had this sort of grungy proto-punk sound I think the band took a strong liking to. You have these huge guitar riffs mashed with Iggy's short, very clever lyrics, like songs like No Fun. Like, these songs always tend to find a way to get into your head. And I think their live show as well had a big impact on the Jesus and Mary Chain. And then when you look at songs like 1969, you can see a influence that the two of them share. Bo Diddley. So Bo Diddley, you have that classic Bo Diddley drum beat, which heavy on the toms. You can tell like Jesus and Mary Chain were loving that floor tom for most of their songs. They were heavy on that. And as well as that fierce one chord just stabbing it through the entire song mostly. They took a lot from that, as well as just looking like a cool motherfucker. Same thing applies for Muddy Waters and the Chicago Blues Band. They were just like that laid back, just cool guy on the stage rocking out was, I think that was a huge thing for the Jesus and Mary Chain. And bands like Suicide, they also helped with the pounding rhythm and just, I think, attitude in general for the Jesus and Mary Chain. The biggest influence on the Jesus and Mary Chain is most definitely the Velvet Underground. You have Lou Reed's effortlessly cool vocals and guitar parts. You have Sterling Morrison, just animal he is on guitar, creating like menacing feedback on songs like White Light, White Heat, and just Sister Ray in general is probably like the holy grail to the Jesus and Mary Chain, I would say. Mo Tucker's intense drumming, just the multi-instrumental craziness that John Cale provided. And on top of that, you have Andy Warhol, he's behind them too. So it's just, it was a perfect match for the Jesus and Mary Chain sound. And what I think is most incredible about the Velvet Underground is that, besides the fact that they fall into the psycho category here, they are probably one of the most important aspects of the candy category too. The candy side of things is just those 60s pop melodies that kind of lies underneath all that noisy craziness that the Jesus and Mary Chain uses to almost supplement Phil Spector's wall sound. So once again with the Velvet Underground, well, more specifically the Velvet Underground and Nico for the candy aspect, you have songs like Femme Fatale, Sunday Morning, all these songs with these basic chord structures and delicate melodies.
Early dawning, Sunday morning.
And you can tell that the Jesus and Mary Chain took a lot from this, like songs like Just Like Honey, even in the acoustic version of Taste of Cindy, Taste of Candy, always get that mixed up, but like even in that you hear there's a lot of Sunday Morning in that song. So the Beach Boys, they are a huge influence on the Jesus and Mary Chain. I think especially in songs like The Living End and The Hardest Walk, you hear a lot of that pre-Pet Sounds Beach Boys stuff, like especially in songs like Surfin' USA. One of the most important factors that goes into making the Jesus and Mary Chain's music is the influence of 60s girl groups. Now, these sweet and catchy melodies,
The way he walks down the street, that's the way he shuffles his feet. Here comes my guy, walking down the street.
the simple, and specifically when you think of Be My Baby by the Ronettes, it's the drum part for Just Like Honey. It's a straight copy.
Be my baby. Say you be my darling. Be my baby now. Oh, 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 oh. I'll make you happy, baby. Just wait and see.
But these girl groups essentially were a huge influence on the Brothers. Like I said in the beginning, they wanted to make Shangri-La's records.
He don't hang around with
So the Jesus and the Mary Chain essentially took these incredibly punky, noisy, underground influences and mixed them with their love of 60s girl groups and Phil Spector wall of sound pop. It's just the weirdest mix of music to come out of the mid-80s when you have like the height of New Order and just all these electronic groups. And I just love the Jesus and Mary Chain they're just so different from, they were just such an outsider in the music scene at the time. It's mesmerizing to me. That's all I've got to say about the Jesus and Mary Chain. Check back next week for another video.
Shrevey, who cares about what's on the flip side of a record?
I do! Every one of my records means something. The label, the producer, the year it was made. Who was copying whose styles, who was expanding on that. Don't you understand? When I listen to my records, they take me back to certain points in my life, okay? Just don't touch my records. Ever.